Good afternoon and welcome to UHS Events. Let's talk about relationships with Dr. Alex Morales. I'm Maria Circe. I work for UHS Events and we're excited that you're here. Definitely given the times that we're in, we are in close relationship to some folks and further apart from others. So I think there's no greater time than to get that advice from the expert on how to navigate that. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. We will be recording this session, so just keep in mind that if you don't want to be recorded, please turn off your video and your audio as well. If you have questions as they come up, feel free to directly message them to me as the host, and I'll make sure they get asked. If you're not following our Instagram, please make sure you follow us at CPP_UHS events. I will list that in the chat message if you didn't catch that. And then also, this is going to be uploaded to YouTube. So if your friends weren't able to join you today, or if you want to rewatch anything, you can. It'll be uploaded after this is over. And our YouTube channel is UHS Events Team CPP. So if you're not subscribed, you should subscribe. And then lastly, we are taking attendance. So if you could please just type your name into the chat window, we greatly appreciate it. That would help us to prove that we should do more events like this. So we're gonna jump right in. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest today. We have Dr. Alejandro Morales, or Dr. Alex. He's an associate professor of psychology in the psychology department here at Cal Poly Pomona. He conducts qualitative, quantitative, and mixed method studies on the psychosocial cultural mechanisms of adjustment in Latino immigrant families with children who serve as translators and interpreters, so i.e. language brokers. His research also focuses on identifying the processes that facilitate the psychological well-being of Latino gay men. He teaches courses on abnormal psychology, basic counseling skills, intimate relationships, human sexuality, and couples psychotherapy. For the past 2 years, he's served as the faculty advisor of the Psi-Chi chapter at Cal Poly Pomona. Last year, he joined Psi-Chi's Diversity Advisory Committee. He received his PhD and Master's in Counseling Psychology from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and his Bachelor's in Psychology from the California State University, Dominguez Hills. So let's all give our little claps and snaps for Dr. Alex, because he's going to be navigating all the hard questions that y'all submitted. So.
Thank you, Maria.
Of course, thank you for being here. We're so thankful to have you as our faculty in residence.
Thanks.
So we're gonna start off with some questions geared toward familial relationships.
Okay.
All right, so our first question that we have for you today is, do you have tips or techniques to use when wanting and needing to set boundaries with friends and family?
Yes. Before I get started, I just want to say that the information that I share is based on actual research and practice that psychologists and other professionals have invested, as well as I will integrate some of my own, experiences, by working with couples and teaching couples psychotherapy here at the university. Setting boundaries with family is definitely an ongoing struggle or challenge for everybody, right? For college students, for professors, for everybody. Families are definitely our first social group. So and we're constantly in contact with them, right? I think now because of the quarantine, we are even more exposed to our families, right? And what happens when you get a lot of people together or groups of people together is that they start, feeling somewhat uncomfortable. There's like, why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? I think for college students in particular is how can they continue their, taking courses, doing their schoolwork within the context of their home or where they are. I think that some of the things that people can do, like out the bat, to help sort of like set boundaries, is to have, for example, if you have your earphones on and you're working on your computer, even if you're not listening to music, you're already letting people know that you are busy, right? So engaging in certain behaviors that don't necessarily are verbal, you know, can really help you decide, or can really help setting those boundaries. Sometimes, there'll be, I know, like my mom does all that all the time. Like I'm working and I have my earphones on, and she's like, "You want something to eat? You want water or anything?" And I take off my earphones and be like, "Oh yeah, yeah," and then I put them back. Or like, or if I want something, I say like, if I'll get it I'll get it on my own, or I'll do it. You know. So with adults, I think it's a little bit easier than what is with children, right? I think with children, if there are children in the home, I think that's a challenge of itself, because I think children do not necessarily understand the same way as adults. So maybe spending 5 minutes with them playing, or you know doing something with them in an iPad, and say like, okay, now I have to go and do my work, or engaging with you, like, okay, you're coloring while I work on this paper or whatever it is. I think that there's ways that we can sort of like continue with our work while we have people around us, right? There are, of course, situations where space is an issue, right? And I think that, well, I don't have a desk. If I use the kitchen table, then everybody comes, and that's true. So I think it's also finding places or spaces that maybe are outside of their homes, that they can use, for example, in their car, right? Or like if they had a patio, or if they have a front yard, backyard. If they live in an apartment complex, right? Looking for areas that are safe, right? And that do not expose them and others. Could be good ideas. I think it's just trial and error, right? I think telling them, screaming to people, or telling them, "Oh my God, I'm done," or like, "You don't understand," it just causes more friction. I think that there are things that we can do to be able to set boundaries that could be verbal, also nonverbal, that can really help us, to see, or to see, and to see that we're setting a boundary, but also to let the other person know as well that we are busy. And sometimes I think what I have done too, with in some cases, is with my niece and my nephew, that they want to help me, so I put them to, either put my exams in alphabetical order, or my scantrons, or like, hey, like, look at this picture, or tell me what this person got. And so, in my engaging them, you also, this helping you also to get them to do work, right? Like, to be able, so that they're not like doing other things. So those are sort of like suggestions or recommendations that I have. But also to recognize that if people live in a context where there's like domestic violence, where there's like all these other, you know issues or stressors happening, I think you have to think about, then maybe being in my car could be a good idea, right? Or places where, again, where you are safe and you're not exposed to potentially large groups of people.
Great, thank you so much. We're going to move on to our next question. And before I do, I forgot to make an announcement that you should have a notebook and something to write with, so that you can take notes as this is going on. Yes, you can refer back to it on YouTube, but I think it's beneficial when you're like, what was that? To kind of go back and know where you want to
Yeah.
get more information. So highly encourage that. I'm definitely taking notes over here. So thank you for that.
Okay.
Our next
Yeah.
question is, I don't see myself as having a negative relationship with my parents, but there's nothing I really enjoy about it either. What are some things that commonly make for good parent to child relationships, specifically later in life?
Yes. I think that is probably a common sort of experience that people have, especially people who are students in college, right? I think that they are creating their own identity, start creating who they are, right? I think that sometimes we may feel that we're very different than our parents. And even getting to college, right? We may see that we're very different because they might have studied something different, they might have not gone to school, or they might have gone to school in a different part of, in a different country. Um, so I think just like any other relationships, right? Like you have to sort of start trying to see like, well, they're my parents and what do they like? Get to know them. I think sometimes it's very interesting to hear when I have worked with students and I say, so how do your parents meet? And they're like, I don't know. Like I never asked them. Right. Or like, um, what are your parents like? What do they like? I think that sometimes because we have very busy lives, right? Like we can see sometimes the parents maybe working a lot or, students like Cal students either live here on campus or they live off campus. They may not have a lot of exposure with their parents, excuse me. I think it's just having those conversations, talking about like, how was your day? And I'll be like, oh, fine. No, no, no. How really, like, how was your day? And I think starting to get and to have more interest in one another. I think sometimes parents may also feel that they cannot talk to their child because they have nothing in common. And I want to beg the difference. I think that they could be, for example, politics, values, right? Could be food. It could be, music. There could be a lot of different things because they live together. So and if they're not, it's not negative. So there must be something there that brings them together, right? Is it food? Is it celebrations? Is it a particular holiday? There's a lot of things that we can definitely think about because, and this is a little bit off the topic, but I think when we think about when we are young adults and then we start thinking about what kind of parent we're gonna be, a lot of us would say, "Oh, I'm never gonna be like my parent," and it's true. You're never gonna be them because they're their own person and their own individual. But our role models in terms of parenting are our parents. So a lot of the things that we are gonna implement and apply and use when we are raising our children may be directly or indirectly from our parents. So I think, I think everybody likes to eat and you want to have a good relationship with your parents, go out to eat, cook a meal together, learn about why is the meal important for them or for you, right? Or ask about like what kind of baby I was, like my first day at school. So there are memories, that can bring those two. They can bring both the children and the parents together to get to know each other. We can have a different relationship with our parents as adults, right? I think that we can redefine them and make and be different. And being different doesn't have to be bad. I mean, it's just different, where both of us can get something satisfying and meaningful from each other. So yeah.
Thanks so much. I mean, it almost seems kind of like simple in a way, like our parents are people too. They
Yes.
had histories before we were born, before they assumed the role of parent.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's really hard, especially now. I mean, if you're in your home of your childhood, those of you that have had to move back or for whatever reason, that's the case. I get that push pull. One of the best things that happened to my relationship with my parents was moving to California. I'm from Massachusetts. And they, at that point, had to realize, like, I'm an adult, I'm independent, I can take care of myself. And our
Exactly.
conversation shifted to like, hey, how are you as a human? What's going on? Like,
Yeah.
so I think that's really great practical advice, and just apply it to any human. If you have interest in them, they're gonna have interest back in you. You ask
Yeah.
questions. People like to talk about themselves.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes, I agree. And I think going back to what you said, this individualization, right? That you are an adult, I think is very important. I think when you bring culture and gender, it's even more, a little bit more complex, right? Like my daughters, right? My son, and so I think in our culture, you don't leave the house, right? Or everybody lives with you, and so there's a lot of negotiation and a lot of conversations. But I think that if you communicate, I think as you sort of mentioned as well, it's definitely an opportunity to just let me tell you how is this going to be done. This I know what I'm not. It's not going to be perfect because nothing is perfect, but I'm going to try my best and do it. And if I need help, I'll come and ask, and because parents are supposed to be that, right? Support and the people we sort of approach for the most part. So
Thank you. All right, we're going to dive into the next question.
yes.
So, my sibling has decided to marry someone myself and our parents find to be toxic. How
Mm.
do we be authentic and help her see the light while not pushing her toward the toxic fiance or isolating her?
So yes, I think that that happens, a lot. And when I say a lot, it happens all the time. No, I think it happens that sometimes we may not necessarily like our siblings' partners, and that's yeah. I mean, you want what's best for your sibling, right? I think that when the person talks about toxicity, is what do they mean? Is it that they're physically, verbally abusive? Is they're psychologically abusive? Is it that like what is it? Is it behaviors? Is it things that they say? What's going on there? Um, I think the approach that I would recommend them not to take would definitely be like, no, this person is not good for you, and this and cause a clash between the sibling and the family. Because the more we fight them about like this person is not good for you, this person is not good for you, the more they're gonna go to that person. It's kind of like adolescents, right? When you tell them you're not dating that person and you're not dating, and then they start dating them. Um, so that's human, they're just part of being human beings, right? So I think it's, as the person asks how genuinely, I think that's one thing to ask, and never say like, well, he does this. No, say, I notice everything used with I statements and what you observe. And I just want to check in with you, right? Like I noticed that, when I'm gonna use he or she came over, you know, they they told you something that bothered me because it's something we haven't, it's a word that we don't necessarily use. I noticed that he or she or they grabbed you and if it look kind of harsh and it make me feel uncomfortable. Um, so depending, I think that whenever we are confronting our siblings or family members, it's quite difficult, especially we're talking about their significant other, right? Um, but we have to be very specific that when we give them when we're telling them, we're focusing not in the person, but we're focusing on the things that they do and the outcome that we see, right? I fear for you. I fear that he or she may, do something or may, separate you from the family or things of that nature. It is possible that in some cases when if the person is engaged in a very dysfunctional relationship that they do not see it.
Mm,
And that's unfortunately what happens to humans whenever they engage in those relationships. Um, but and also not telling them, oh, you can do so much better. No, focus more about the behaviors of the individual and how those behaviors um, sort of like how do you interpret them? And you just want to double check with them if they notice that And if they didn't, for you to just like, yeah, remember, like he or she or they said this, or they'll be like, oh, I didn't notice that, right? So I think that that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is that it depends how old the person is too. So if you're talking to a person who's in her or his 20s or 30s, sometimes even if you have this heart to heart conversation, they may still not be like, I'm an adult and I do whatever I want.
Mm.
So all you can do in situations like that, say like, you know what, I love you, I care about you, and I will support you. I'm here for you. I think that a lot of the times we like, well, screw you. Like, I hope that they do this. And that's not the way to go. Because one, it could be that, yes, the person is toxic. And then your family member may, suffer the consequences of that. But it's also that your family member may come back and be like, hey, you were right. And I'll be like, oh, I told you so. No, what's the point? Is they're going to do anything better? No. So I think that they are those are sort of like ways for you to for people to talk about their family members about this, and and not be constantly be telling them, see, like, look what they did. Or, no, because it's only gonna make the situation worse, right? So just having an honest conversation and be like, hey, I just want to talk to you about something. I've been noticing these behaviors from your partner, and they're, I'm uncomfortable because it makes me feel that this, and then they can tell you, oh, that's how they are, or like, I never not knew about that. Like, thank you for noticing. Like, I am actually in a dysfunctional relationship and I need help. So I think it's just approach it in a way that is non-judgmental, but that you're there for the individual, right? Like, are we gonna cut all ties because we may not necessarily like their partner? I mean,
Mm.
I don't think that's the case. I think that that we um, that we just have to be careful in terms of how we. I think everything is, we have to be careful in how we approach the situation, right? There are different ways, but never has to be that you know it all, or that they should listen to you, that they should get it, because it's not the case.
Yeah. I think that's really great advice, because you're not the one in the relationship with that person, and you can't force somebody to take action. You're only in control of you. And I think what you said was really nice about even putting it in I statements and putting it in observations,
Yes.
because we're not always aware of some of the beliefs that we hold or the negative perceptions. And
Exactly.
so making it about what you observed and not your evaluation is healthy even to do beforehand, because maybe it is you. Maybe you're looking at it in like the wrong way, and you can kind of realize, oh, there really isn't an issue here in advance. And so I think that's important. And again, in being authentic, you can
Yes.
have a conversation where you feel like you can express yourself, but you're expressing yourself based off of knowing you want your sibling to understand you, because you want to
Exactly.
help them. It's not
Yes.
about you. It's not about winning, and it's not about being right. It's about helping them. And then just think about it. If you were in that situation, how would you want someone to talk to you? And so I think excellent. Love it.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree with everything you said. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So we have the question that says, how do you deal with language barriers with your significant other's parents?
Mm, yes. I think that that's a this. I think it happens in a country such as ours, especially in Southern California, right? I think that depending on, more than likely, because we have gone to school and everything, there are these possibilities that we're gonna be dating or even marrying somebody who is from a group different than ours, right? I think that language barriers are always going to be there, right? I think that there's, either one of the one of the individuals have to learn the language, or the parents will have to learn the language, or whatever it is. But I always go back to something that I think is very powerful, which is body language, right?
Mm.
How do you express emotions, right? Like how can you say that you're happy or that you're happy to see them, right? Like touching, right? Like, are you, when you see their parents, are you embracing them? Do you smile? Do you try to learn, small phrases, or like, hi, how are you? Or things like that. I think that body language plays a big deal. Um, for example, my younger brother is married to a woman who is from Korea, and she only speaks Korean and English. My mother and father do not speak any English, so how do they get along really well. But again, I think it's body language, right? Like my sister-in-law helps my mom and vice versa. They give each other gifts, and I think it takes time, right? I think that also knowing that what those in this case will be cultural differences, right? Is the language too difficult to learn, or how to do partners usually treat their other partners parents, right? What is culturally appropriate, right? Can I bring this to your parents? Can I help them with this, right? Or 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 their parents want to do things for, in this case, their kid, their son, daughter's partner, right? Um, what do they like? What can we give you for this or that? And um, so I think that there's different things. I think like asking your partner, like, what do your parents like, right? Um, what can we do for them, right? How do they celebrate the holidays, or what holidays do they celebrate that we don't necessarily celebrate, right? Um, so I think there's like various ways that we can, in one way or the other, communicate and to have a good relationship with with our either future in-laws or our in-laws, right? And I think the other, what is going to be boiling down is that every parent wants their child to be happy. So I think that if their child is happy, right, parents are gonna be happy too, right? Like they're gonna see that you are a good person, that that your you know their child is like changing and doing well, and and is they seen differences in terms of like this person is, their child is growing. And I think that's good for parents when they see that, because then they see like, oh, okay, so ever since he or she or they started dating this person, they're doing well, they're doing better, they are happier. So I think that those are ways to communicate with them. The others is could be also, inviting them over for holiday parties or celebrations to, their house, or, or this case, the partner's house, so that they can engage into something different, right? Get to know them, and they get to know you as well. I think a lot of the times these barriers exist is because we don't necessarily allow ourselves to know what is it like to be in the other person's shoes, right? So I think that those could be some, and now with, this is just totally out of context, but there's Google's Translate. You can have, your partner be that interpreter, like tell your parents this, but you know, So I think there are ways that people can do that. I think people just have to try and see what could be the most effective or the way that to do it. I mean, but I think boils down to if they have a happy if the couple has a happy relationship, I think parents will be happy, you know?
I think what you said was really powerful, especially like I think 90% of communication is through body language.
Yes.
And so I think if you're feeling uncomfortable by the language barrier, that's going to show and that might be off putting. So just know like what can you do, focusing on the positive things. And all of those are
Yes.
really great
Yeah.
options and opportunities
Yes.
to do that. So
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, thank you.
Yes.
We have another challenging question to do with families, and this
Uh-huh.
came from our chat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what advice do you have for a person whose sibling and parents don't talk to each other anymore? Is there any actions they could take, or is it best to accept all of them just the way they are and allow them to go through the process of not interacting with each other?
Yeah. I think those situations, that and that happens in all families, right? There's always gonna be a family member who doesn't talk to one or the other. So I think one is to validate and normalize that that's gonna happen. And it happens. Um, I think when those situations are taking place in a home, is that we have to be very mindful that we cannot be the ones in the middle. So we do not have to be the ones, communicating the siblings' concerns to the parents and being the middle person. No.
Mm-hmm.
And to really acknowledge, I was like, that is their relationship. That is not my relationship with them. A lot of the times, I think that families, and I think regardless of their background and regardless of what country they're from or whatever it is, that we feel that we have to put up with it, right? They're like, oh well, we're family, and you stole half of my savings. Like, I guess, like, I'm just not gonna talk to you, but we're gonna live in the same. No, I think that people is understanding that you get to define that relationship. In this case, one is redefining the relationship that you have with each. We can call it system, which is your sibling. If he or she or they start telling, oh, tell my dad that this, I'll be like, you know what? You tell him or tell her. This is the mother, or tell them, right? And if the parents say like, no, go tell your, brother or sister that they need to do this, be like, no, you tell them. Because a lot of the things that are going to happen is that then they're going to start thinking that you are their messenger, one. And two, who do you think they're going to get mad at? They're going to get mad at you for that, whatever it is that your sibling didn't do or whatever your parents didn't do. I think it's always redefining and setting those boundaries, right? Telling people like, you know what? Yeah, no, I'm not gonna do this, right? Like, you wanna tell them here, or the other way here. Or sometimes I think if it escalates to the point that they're constantly and they don't listen to what you tell them, then easily be grab your whatever parents or sibling and be like, bring them to the kitchen table or the dining room table and be like, here, you two have to talk about this. I gotta go, right? I think that because towards the end, the person who gets stressed out, overwhelmed, and then will not have a relationship neither with the the sibling or the parents is gonna be the person who's in the middle, and that is just not fair to that person, right? Because they didn't have anything to do with it. If these two individuals don't talk to each other, well, that's their thing. You can still have a relationship with your parents, and you can still have a relationship with your sibling if it's positive, if it's fulfilling, if you know both are is reciprocal. but never I think that the one that we have to fix it, two that they should talk to each other. No, I think that I think that life is too short to be trying to live and to try to fix people or try to like be around people that you don't necessarily is good for you. Then no, I think it's okay to say, no, I don't want to do this. But I think like setting those boundaries in terms of like that person in the middle saying no, it's not my place, it's not my responsibility for you to, to get the two of you to communicate. So
I think that's really powerful. Sometimes, we need to hear that. We need to be affirmed and validated because it doesn't feel good to tell parents no or tell siblings no. But
yes,
ultimately, whatever caused that rift, it's up to them to fix. You can't do the work for them. And
exactly.
so it might not feel good, but it doesn't feel good perpetuating that cycle. So I
No,
think, you have to, if you set that boundary, stick to that boundary,
yes,
and they'll either work it out or they don't, but
yeah,
it's their issue, right?
yeah.
So,
It's their, yeah, exactly. There's their issue. I mean, I think a lot of the times no, but you should help them. Like, why? or or that you should do this because you're my child. Uh, okay. Well, no, I don't. Like I don't. And I think it goes back to sort of the question at the beginning, right? Like this individualization that people go through that don't necessarily people understand that we are adults and we make our own choices.
mhm. All right, well, perfect. We're going to move on to romantic questions, romantic relationships.
Yes.
So, we had my boyfriend and I have a hard time during discussions slash arguments because he is a more logical thinker and I'm more of an emotional thinker. I don't know
Hmm.
what to do.
I think that that is I believe a common um, experience. I don't want to say complaint. I want to say experience among um, couples, right? And it happens, in heterosexual couples, and it happens in same-sex couples, right? You have a partner who is more logical within like more cerebral, right? And then we have another one who is more emotionally expressive, right? I think one is that you have to have a combination of you don't have to have a combination, so you have to have two logical people and two emotional people. You cannot have one of each. And I think that's sort of like a misconception, not sort of, it's a misconception that a lot of people have about relationships, right? Or that a lot of people have about communicating between two individuals, right? I cannot communicate with them and like they don't get it. This well, let me ask you this. You do know when your partner is pissed off, right? That is communication, right? You do know when your partner is happy, right? Yes, that is communication. I think what people have difficulty communicating is what they need,
Hmm.
right? So I think that a lot of the times they say, "Oh, you just been too emotional," and this is a label that is given to women, right? Like you cannot be emotional. Well, the only way that you cannot be emotional is when you die, because humans are emotional. Men are emotional. Everybody is emotional because it's part of our whole, you know, nervous system. It's a part of who we are. I mean, I can tell you that if you were to poke a man with a needle, is he gonna feel pain? Probably, right? Is he gonna scream? Boy, he has a phobia for needles, maybe. But I think is that in that feeling of pain is emotion, right? So I think is that people often use these labels to sort of like separate them, right? Like they're too logical, or like, oh, you're too emotional. You don't make no. I think what people want to pay attention to is more about what do I want to communicate with my partner, to my partner, excuse me, right?
Mhm.
Instead of saying like, you didn't do this. Did you see what you just did? No, no, no. It's again going back to these I statements. Because if he knew or she knew what you were thinking, or that what you did, what I did was wrong, then the person wouldn't do it, right? So I think it's more about sitting down and be like, okay, let's talk. And just for the person to talk about, this is how I'm feeling. And again, going back to identifying the behaviors and not label the whole person as the behavior, right? You're That's it, you're a horrible person. Well, why did you get with that horrible person, right?
Mhm.
Or like, how is this person? So those are very broad categories that we have to sort of like think about. A lot of the times, I think that whenever we see people expressing emotions, we don't understand where's the emotion coming from, right? So, for example, when a person is angry, why do we think that person is angry? What is the root of anger?
Hurt.
Exactly. And I can tell you that everybody, men, women, children, everybody has experienced what hurt is, right? So if your partner is like angry and this and that, don't say, why are you angry? You know why they're angry. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But the anger is not acceptable. For example, women shouldn't get angry because if they're angry, they're crazy. Like, no. Or that, or that it's okay for men to be angry, n- you know, or that the men should not cry. It's like, well, they have to at one point or the other, they will.
Mhm.
So I think in terms of like communicating is using I statements and really saying what I mean. It's like, it hurt me when I heard you say this, or I was angry because this is how it made me feel, right? I feel inadequate. I feel like unlovable, right? Those are different labels that you can use to express what you really feel, right? That how we really feel about it. And and unfortunately we're not trained to do that, right? I think that depending of our cultural context, right? Like if it's more traditional, this is how you're supposed to behave. If it's more like social class, that's the other things too. There's some different dimensions to consider. But when it boils down, hurt is hurt. It doesn't matter, you know, ethnic background, it doesn't matter race, it doesn't matter sexual orientation, it doesn't hurt is hurt. Now the manifestation of hurt, is can look different depending on the person. So I think that one is learn is you telling people how we really feel and what we need, but also to train the other person to just sit there and listen and not say, oh, you're just being crazy. Well, how? When did you become an expert on, like, what's considered function and dysfunction, right?
Mhm.
And I think that, like, oh no, but well, let me tell you why. No, why don't you just ask? Okay, well, tell me more. Like, how is this? What is it that hurt you? Like, that was not my intention, but I want to know because I don't want to hurt you,
Mhm.
right? And I think it's to recognize those vulnerabilities, right? I think that a lot of the times we think that we shouldn't be vulnerable in front of our partners or anything. It's like, well, if not vulnerable with our partner, then who are we going to be vulnerable with? And being vulnerable, nothing's gonna happen, right? I think it's who you are and who you are, and if they don't like it, they're like, then probably that person is not for you, you know. But I think that a lot of this, sort of like communication, issues is has to do with like people don't listen to one another and don't necessarily know how to respond, for example, when the other person is experiencing emotion, right?
Or even ourselves, like how to regulate our own emotion, I think is huge.
Yes,
And
yes,
people often react and they don't take that mindful moment to like
yes,
figure out what's going on. So a lot of
exactly.
times when we react, it's not even to the person themselves, it's to like something that happened in the past, or like what we didn't have for breakfast, like all different kinds of things. So
You
I,
know, a pattern that happened, or like some a traumatic experience, or just a loss that we experience. There's just, and it's okay to ask. I think that, and I agree. I think that regulating emotions is one. I think that screaming while you're talking is never gonna take you anywhere
right.
or take us anywhere. And also to feel, I think that this whole thing about, and I think it happens a lot to couples, like, oh, what I do if they start crying? I was like, nothing. Like, I think that people
Allow them to cry. You don't have to
exactly
rush in to fix it.
give them a tissue, ask them, is there anything I can do for you? Or like, I'm here for you. Just that's all it takes. I mean, I think it
I mean, it goes
continues.
back to what you were saying. Like
Yes,
humans are emotional. How
yes,
many times, like there is no dichotomy between the sexes and genders. Like we're
yeah,
all emotional. And
yes,
I feel like sometimes we need to hear that. Like it's okay to have
yeah,
emotions. It's okay.
yes,
But the next step is like, if you really want to communicate, how best are you going to be heard and understood? And
yes.
I think it was Byron Katie who like came up with this checklist of questions that I find helpful. It's like,
Hmm.
what you're saying necessary? Is
Hmm.
what you're saying kind? And also, is what you're saying going to get you what you want?
Exactly.
That's
Yeah, because most of us just want to feel, want to be, want to experience what it's like to be seen, right?
all.
I
I mean,
think
like
there's
if you want a hug, don't offend somebody, right?
exactly. Or then just don't go and hug anybody,
Yeah.
especially nowadays. So, um, but yeah, I completely agree. I think that to me it's always very interesting when people say like, "Oh, men and women are different." I was like, no. I was like, because if you're saying that, then men should be with men and women should be with women, and same-sex couples have the same issues as heterosexual couples. Even if biologically, they have the same equipment. So I think that there's and it doesn't help that media sort of like has those perceptions, right? That, why is it that women are for Venus and men are for Mars, right? If you compare it, Venus is the goddess of beauty, and okay, so very stereotypically,
But men are
you know,
beautiful as well. Yeah.
exactly,
Mhm.
yeah, a lot of them,
Yeah.
just like a lot of women, right? So, so I think that that we have, and that every relationship is different, right? Like every person that we date is different. It's not the same person,
Hmm.
and to allow ourselves to be okay with being vulnerable, right? I think one of the when I teach intimate relationships, I often ask my students, how can you prevent getting hurt in a relationship? And they're like, well, they're like not telling them everything or whatever or this or that. It's like, no. The only way that you will never ever that someone will never ever get hurt is by not being in a relationship or have no types of attachments, right? Which for humans is impossible, right? I think that they're noticing now, for example, that the people who are single and they are under the quarantine are struggling more because who do they talk to? Who can they interact with?
I know.
Virtually it's nice, but what I mean is If you have a pet, that's great.
Yeah.
But there's some that who don't, and
Mhm.
it does, it does play with your mind, and it does cause this psychological pain. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's move on to another question. We have quite a few here and a little bit of time left. So, how do you know if you're just out of the honeymoon phase versus you're no longer excited or desiring your partner?
Yes, I think it's important for couples to uh, get to become not familiar, to understand, but also to talk with one another about this notion that you want the ideal relationship, or that your relationship has to be like in the movies, or that it has to be like in the Disney princess stories, right? So, for example, when we think about relationships, is the first 2 years of the relationships, and this is long-term relationships, they tend to be, that's where after 2 years, that's when the passion goes down. And passion is what? Is sex, right? Is the touching, is the holding of hands, is like the kissing in public, like the PDAs, right? All these, behaviors. And I think that sometimes people um, or couples think that that's going to keep happening, like even like after 10, 20 years, and it's not. Biologically, our the equipment, after using it for so long, it's not going to be functioning as well, and that goes and also to understand that those are things to happen, right? That sex is never going to keep a couple together, or the passion is going to keep couples together. The types of relationships that keeps couples together are those that are have the characteristics of what is a friendship, right? So to think about that in terms of like the excitement, the I'm getting bored. Well, why are you getting bored? Like, what attracted you to this person? If you say, oh, we went to Magic Mountain every month, it's like, well, that kind of get expensive and you cannot do it right now. So I think that is finding things, right? Like finding activities, finding, rituals, or finding moments where you can have these moments of reconnection, right? I think that if we think that our partner is gonna be constantly like holding our hands and kissing us and all this, it's not gonna happen. We see, for example, that among marriages, um, or partnerships, um, after the 4 year, after the no, within the first year, I believe, um, there's a decrease of 50% in terms of touching, right? And there's also, that a lot of behaviors change, right? If you expect your partner to bring you a flower, chocolates, or to take you out to eat every weekend or anything like that, after 3, 4, 5 years, that may be challenging because people, um, interestingly and unfortunately, may not necessarily do that in long-term relationships. And if they do it, they don't do it as often, right? So, for example, a couple of years ago, my mom called me on Valentine's Day because she was very sad because my dad had not bought her flowers. And I
Oh.
was like, okay. So yeah, exactly. I was like, oh, I was like, so I was like, did he buy you flowers last year? No, but when we were dating, he would buy me flowers like every month, and on Valentine's Day, he would bring me this and that. And I was like, yeah, but that was back then. Uh, And it's like, why isn't it the same? I was like, one, it's because you don't tell him. And she told me, well, he should know. I was like, no, if he knew, he would have done it, right? So there's all these, I think, assumptions that we have, or that we feel that people read our minds. But but if you, I tell my students when they ask me, so what do we do? I'm like, this is, you just tell them every Valentine's Day, as long as we're together, I expect you to buy me flowers. That's it. You know, if that is a very important as important, it's so important for you to have in your relationship, to continue having a relationship, then you remind them and you tell them, you know,
Mhm.
because this whole concept of like, oh, well, they should know, they should remember, or this. I'm like, it's hard to. I think in the first couple of years, like couples tend to be like celebrating their first year anniversary, second, third, but it's usually after the fourth year where you see sort of like a decline on some of these behaviors. But if you want them in your relationship, constantly in your relationship, then tell them, remind them, and trust me, they will not forget. So
Well, if you're telling them, they're not gonna forget.
you
I
know,
think it's important too to, like, everybody communicates love in different ways too.
yes,
So, to expect someone to understand that you want the gift of flowers when, you're the type of person that's like, let's have experiences, quality time together on Magic Mountain, there's going to
yes,
be a mismatch too. So,
exactly.
communicate like, this is how I experience love. And like, shameless plug, but next Thursday, we're gonna be talking about 5 love languages. So if you're like, what are you talking about, Maria? You can learn more about what I'm talking about and kind of how to have those conversations. Because a lot of us, it's like, it is its own language. Um,
Um,
and you think that you're being clear, like, oh, well, I listened to you when you said we need to save more money. So I didn't get you flowers this year because I'm trying to save money. And then it's like, okay, well, where's that breakdown coming from?
yeah.
So I think that's really powerful. So moving on to the next question.
Yes.
And this definitely has to do with quarantine. So, hello, Dr. Alex. I'm in a romantic relationship and am currently living with them during this quarantine. And it's our first time living together. My question is, what's the best way to coexist with each other without being overbearing?
That's a very that's good. I think that one is to one is to recognize that because of the quarantine or because of the COVID-19, that adds an additional stressor to anyone, right? Or relationships, romantic and non-romantic. I think when people decide to move in together, it's a big step, right? I think emotionally, psychologically, in many ways, it's big, and with that comes a lot of issues or benefits, attached with it. I think when people want to coexist with one another, we just think about it. How do people coexist, or how do you coexist at school? How do you coexist at work, at the place where you lived before, right? And I think that we're gonna go back to the whole notion is that you two are getting to know each other within the context of this home, right? So it's gonna take some time, right? So don't expect one partner to be like, okay, here, go put my clothes away, or like this is, or this is how we do put the clothes in a particular way, or who's gonna be washing the dishes, or there has to be a lot of communications and negotiation too, right? Um, Not everybody gets what they want. I'll be like, oh, well, you have to bring me breakfast to bed every Sunday. Well, that could be challenging if you don't know how to cook, So I think that you sort of have to have those conversations and to talk about expectations that people have and how do they feel about not moving in together. Because a lot of the times we have these sort of expectations, oh, it's going to be like great, it's always going to be fun. We're going to be able to have so much fun, get to know each other. Yes, there's going to be a lot of that, definitely. But I think that is those little perks or those little, things that we do for one another that can potentially, you know, cause conflict. I think that that often people don't talk about that at the beginning, right? I think that um, that they need that we need to have it, and sometimes we have to think about if I'm invested in this relationship, is that is it really that big of a deal if they don't you know do this or do that? Then you just think, then people have to think about it. Maybe, maybe not, you know. But I think that if it is important, people should talk about it and be like, hey, like, can you? It will mean a lot to me if you were to help me with this, you know. And then people are not going to sort of like have these expectations because they have already talked about it, right? I have a colleague that she says that I don't know how to cook, and her partner is a great chef and everything, and so he cooks and she cleans, and that's the arrangement, and she's okay with it, and he's okay with it, and but they had a conversation and about this, right? A
Mhm.
lot of it you have to have these conversations, right? Because we all have our own little perks, right? I mean, from like, how do we fold our clothes? How do we do our laundry? How do we like our personal hygiene? Like, even the sheets that we put in our bed, right? And there's some people who are like, oh, I don't care. But there's some like, no, 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 I want it to be Egyptian cotton, in purple. So while others are like, oh, I don't care, right?
Great choice.
Uh-huh. But I think that one is, but also to have moments, I think that they sort of like take a break where they can be with one another, right? I think that being with one another is important. Um, so finding those times and having those moments, and it doesn't have to be every day, right? I think that, but things that you can do with one another to be able to like feel that they're still connected, right? Um, I think coexisting with another person also means that you also have to be around other person, but as if you were alone, right?
Mhm.
So I think that if your partner is watching TV, you don't necessarily have to go and sit down and watch TV with them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if my partner like to watch baseball, like you do that. I gotta go because I don't like watching baseball, right? Or maybe I would if it was, whatever. He were to ask me, hey, you want? Then maybe, right? So I think that but it's coexisting, right? That you don't have to do everything together. And that for you, both of you to have those moments of like that you can be alone. One can be in the room, the living room, the kitchen, or whatever it is, to be able to just coexist. And I'm not saying like you're making food and whatever, and then you're eating, and you're like, oh, you wanted to eat, but say like, hey, I'm gonna make this. What do you think? Then they may say like, hey, no, 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 we're just gonna order takeout or whatever. But I think it's just learning that and getting to know those um I don't know how yeah, I do know how to call it. But getting to know that person in terms of like the who they are and when do they need to be alone, right? Or when do they need to be with the other person, right? So it could be as sitting next to each other, watching TV together and embracing one another, or being next to each other and holding hands or not holding hands. I mean, it has to be something that the two individuals work it out. Um, I think that whenever we live together with another person, but then, for example, we move in with their families, that can be a little complicated too. And I think that's when the communication has to be even more transparent and ongoing. because then you are the one who moved in into their home, right? So the other person doesn't have to change anything.
Yeah.
Like their parents are here and you're the stranger one. So I think that there's,
An important aspect too, like in kind of a power differential, like whose apartment or whose place are you moving into that has like that whole process
yes,
like already existing that you have to deal with. But I mean, we work in housing over here. We enforce the importance of doing a contract or a roommate agreement in the beginning to have these conversations about stuff. And people always say, oh, that's never going to be a thing. And then it becomes a thing, and just because you're in an intimate partner relationship doesn't mean that you don't play the role of roommate. And I
exactly.
have a couple friends that they've been living together for 10 years. And the first Saturday of every month, they sit down and they kind of have like Struggle Bus Saturday, where they talk about the issues they have as roommates. And it's like, it's separate from the relationship. They're not going to break up over it. They have these ground rules of how to
Yes.
have conversations about the expectations of their home. And it's been very successful for them, because it has nothing to do with whether they love one another and everything to do with like how they exist in their
Yeah.
space, in their home. And so the
Yeah, it's
conversations
about
are essential.
it's about the harmony, like if there's harmony, everybody's happy, and yes, we are, and if you're happy, then you get to do more fun stuff, you get to do more meaningful, things with your significant other. And yeah, I think exactly what you say, and allow yourself to create your own sort of like rules about like, hey, we're gonna talk about this every, Saturday morning, whatever, or over coffee or whatever it is, and
Mm-hmm.
be okay with it, because I think that there are things that you don't like about your partner, and I'm sure there are things that your partner doesn't like about you. Okay, well, let's find out. I think that if we're aware, then maybe we'll definitely not engage in them any as much, or be like, hey, you know what? Actually, that was pretty bad. I shouldn't do it. So yeah, I agree in terms of like you get to redefine or define your own terms of how you want to live, right? Because I think that you know it can get messy, especially if you let other people come in into your relationship or your home, where you're like, what do I, I think about, in terms of like whenever people, couples decide to get together, but they move in into his house, her house, and their family around is that's challenging. Not impossible, but it's challenging. I think that it can definitely take a toll on both individuals.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
let's move on to our next question.
Okay.
Is everyone's timing different? I feel like me and my boyfriend are moving too fast, and I keep on comparing my relationship with others.
Yes. So just as like I think that that's normal that we always comparing ourselves, but I think that I want you to I want people to think about how, imagine what would it feel like for you to be compared with your sibling if you have one, right? Or, imagine your professor like, oh, you're just not like so and so. Comparing doesn't get us anywhere, right? And we're all different, right? In terms of likes and dislikes. Relationships, they're all different, right? We need to part of it is, instead of seeing it like how do they compare or how are they different, m- I think sometimes we're like, okay, well, what is it about this relationship that I like? I want to get to know this person, right? Um, the question about timing, I think that it depends on what you call moving in too fast. One, two is also, are we our decisions or or the development of the relationship allowing you to get to know that person well? And those are questions that are like, how much do I know about this person, right? Do I, because a lot of the, so this is what happens when you like somebody or you're like so emotionally like involved with somebody. It's not only your body and or your thoughts, it's also your brain. Your brain produces chemicals that are like they have you super excited, and you're like, oh my god, he or she's the one. And wait, like I think that you have to allow yourself to feel those chemicals, which is great, right? And the first impressions are very important because they they leave a big impression on our memories. But also to get to know the individual, right? I think one aspect of doing that is what are your values, right? What is your value system? For example, is your do you for you is finishing your education or finishing your college degree? Okay, that's your the person that you are dating. Are they also value something similar, right? Sometimes do religion, right? Do they believe in God? But these values are things that are very important for us, right? Like we have to our relationships are based in terms of like values. When you would think about those relationships that have been successful, has been that their values tend to be aligned. They agree in terms of like the big things, in terms of how they see themselves, um, and how do they see the other person as part of that relationship. Um, but also, I think you know yesterday I was listening to this Holocaust survivor who was from who came from where was he from? I don't remember, but he was in Europe. And he went to the concentration camps. He almost died. I mean, it just talk about the human spirit being resilient. So he moved with his sister to New York. His sister got him a job in this beauty parlor. He learned how to do cutting hair and became a barber. Moved to California, specifically LA. Started working at this, barbershop. Met his wife, and he said within 3 months we got married. And they lived together for 42 years until his wife died of breast cancer. Right? Does it happen? Yes. But I think that it's not that we have to constantly think about. It's like, oh, but am I moving too fast or anything? I think it's that am I getting to know this person well? Do we have the same values? Do we want the same things, right? Um, for example, I think about some of my friends who like they're like, but I wanted to have children, and he doesn't. I was like, well, didn't he tell you before you actually, signed that piece of paper? Yes, but I think I could change that. I was like, no.
Mm-hmm.
I think values are so important and are at the core of our existence, right? And if people don't, if the person that we're dating or going out with doesn't adhere or even consider those values important, then maybe we need to think about this more, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that sometimes we just don't, because we're all these chemicals are happening in our brain and we're like excited and happy and like can't stop thinking about them. Yeah, that's just your brain playing tricks on you, and that's just you know it happens to all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Not only to the emotional ones, it happens to all of us.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, it's really important to kind of be clear on what your own values are and what you're looking for so that you know what you're trying to find in your partner. Um,
Exactly.
and I think you get to define what's fast or what's slow. If you're feeling like it's fast, you can always, have that conversation and put a pause. Like, it's your life, you get to decide. And
Yeah.
you don't want to compare yourself to where others are because you don't know all the
No.
dynamics between them. And even if you
Exactly.
did, it's not about shaming yourself into feeling like you need to be with this person. Like, be where you're at, accept where you're at. That's okay. And the right person is not going to run away if you're like, hey, I'd like to take things slower. They're going
Exactly.
to respect that because they're committed to you and they like you. They want to be there. And yeah,
Exactly.
I mean, like, if your 3 months is going to Magic Mountain, like, what quality conversations are you having on
Yeah.
that roller coaster, So I
Yeah.
think it's important to
Yeah.
have those conversations. So thank you for
Yeah.
that. We have
Yeah.
two more questions. So I'm hoping that we can get through
Yeah.
the next two. Is
Uh-huh.
talking about past relationships necessary? My partner had a horrible past relationship and it's really hard for him to open up.
To so I think when I hear that, I think, is your partner having a difficulty opening up to you, or is he having it's a he, right, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Or is he having a difficulty opening up about what happened in his past relationship? I think you have to be, when that happens, I think you want to be careful, right? In terms of, one, opening up or becoming vulnerable, or or disclosing information is a process, right? I think that we cannot expect from one day to the other to have, expect people to like open up or self-disclose. So if that, let's say the situation is that he is not opening up about how he feels about you or about the relationship with you, I think it's just thinking about then what brought the two of you together, right? What brought the two of you like to form and develop this romantic relationship? And what do you mean by opening up, right? Like, or how do you two define opening up, right? Are we expecting our partner when they open up to tell us like every single detail of their relationship or how they feel? We just had that discussion that we're not good at communicating what we need, right? Or identifying that really core feeling. So I think in that particular example, we have to sort of like work with them, right? And and learn about how do they, if they're scared about opening up, fear, how do we overcome fear? By actually doing the one thing that makes us fearful, right? If in order for that to get to that point, we have to develop trust, and we have to, get to know that person. So the more we get to that, I think the more we can able to develop trust from that person, and vice versa. Also, I think if it's the other one, the other example that I proposed was, is this person, is he not opening up about his past relationships? I think those are, if that's the case, I think that's a topic that you want to take a step back, or people want to take a step back and be like, well, why do I want that piece of information?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that important, right? And if one partner discloses past relationships, it doesn't mean that the other one has to,
Right.
right? I think that those are important questions, right? And I think that a lot of the times people think about I'm not saying that this person in particular, but I think in general in society, saying that, oh, men don't open up because they've been hurt. Well, that could be the case. That could also be cultural. It could also mean that his definition of opening up is very different than yours, right? I think that when we think about opening up, it's about having intimacy, and intimacy takes time, right? We have to feel safe. We have to be, secure. We have to be able to um, to understand that that's okay. You know that it's nothing bad is going to happen. But I think that it's is what are you expecting if we're expecting the other person when they're opening up or to start crying, then no, because they might not feel like crying, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that we have to ask and be and say like, I feel you may not be opening up, and to ask, well, tell me what you mean, what do you mean, you know? Because I think a lot of the times we may have or we both may have a misperceptions about what that means, you know. And I use it as an as a um excuse to either cause an argument like, oh, well, it's because you never open up, and or like say like, no, I don't want to open up because you're gonna hurt me. Like, again, if we don't want any of those things to happen, you know, we just have to talk about it, you know, and have this honest discussion to really, one, listen, say what we mean, and be okay with, you know, whatever the outcome it may be at that time.
Yeah, I think I feel like this is a really good question because I think even in my own, relationships, what should I say, what shouldn't I say? And I think, it kind of goes down to what's the root of why you're talking about it. And I think a lot of times when I've shared my personal backstory, it's almost like I'm expecting the other person to understand, don't do this to me. This hurt,
Exactly.
and
Hmm.
and then I'm talking in a negative instead of a positive of like, I
Yeah.
like when blah, which
Yes.
is more of a roadmap and a guide to someone for them to know like, oh, that's how I show love. If they don't like to show love that way, they can know, that's maybe
Exactly.
the right match.
Yep.
um but
And
it,
that's okay.
and that's
You
okay,
know.
yeah. It's like, what's the purpose of knowing that? And I think as humans, we are comparing a lot. We're comparing, oh, well, I heard when he was with this person that he gave her flowers every day. He's not giving me flowers every day. But do you even want flowers every day? I know I don't, That's feeling really deep.
Yeah.
It's not about that. You know,
Yeah.
give me brownies every day.
Yeah. Take
Um,
me out to eat, you know, or
yeah.
yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think, yeah, it's like figuring out what the purpose is, and then like what's the best way of getting at what you really are wanting. Um,
Hmm.
and just how someone treated someone else does not mean that's how they're going to treat you positively or negatively, because we grow and
Yeah.
evolve as humans. So,
Yeah.
you know, but
And
I think, I
yeah.
feel like I understand why people want to know it, because like, yeah, I want to know that too.
Yeah. Yeah, one that but think about it, that one question people rarely, especially at the beginning of the relationship, ask is like, how many partners have you been with? Have you been tested for these STDs or whatever it is? Can I see the results? You know, oh, because like, no, that's too weird. I was like, that's a one part, that's a one area that you should ask your partner about,
Because
right?
that's
And
changing too if you don't know that
yes,
information. Hmm.
exactly.
And it's a
You
great
know,
way to build trust if someone
exactly.
will show you that. Hmm.
Mhm.
And commitment in you. So,
Exactly.
so our last question for today is, I have a hard time understanding why people value close relationships. I often hear that confiding in each other is the most important piece. If so, what kinds of things do close friends confide in each other that makes the relationship so valuable to them? What are other important things that make people value close relationships so much?
So I think that close relationships mean that you have developed a bond or an emotional bond with somebody, right? Why are they important? And I think that's important question to ask, but it's also something that is so, at least to me, is like so automatic, right? I think that they are important because humans are social animals, right? Um, when people tell me, "Oh, well, I don't need friends or I don't need to have relationships," I'm like, "Okay, I was like, let's look at the prisoners or the inmates who are in solitary confinement. What happens to them?
Hmm.
And people may say like, oh, but they're because they committed a crime or this. Like, okay, so let's look at other times in history, right? Like in Romania, when there was an there was an overpopulation, because at one point the president said that there was not enough Romanians, and then guess what? We're gonna prohibit any type of contraceptive,
Wow.
and what happens? When you prohibit something from people from using, then there are consequences, right? Do we think we're not going to have the people are not going to have sex? Of course they are.
Right.
So what happened? People start having babies after babies after babies, right? And we know, for example, that in places or groups among where we don't educate about, you know, contraception and different types of family planning, you know, people are just going to keep having babies, and babies eat. They need to be taken care of. Babies need diapers, they need this, they need that. So eventually what happened in Romania, just to get to the point, is that there was an overpopulation of children in the orphanages, right? So there was a room with many babies, for only one, two individuals. And when you have babies, a lot of babies, what do? You embrace them, right? Like you hold them.
Hmm.
So there was a lot of children who were never touched, who were never held, who like grew up without having any type of human contact. And eventually what happened is that a lot of them couldn't develop the social skills to be able to develop bonds, right? They didn't learn how to regulate emotions, one. Two, they just didn't learn how to bond with other people, both like friends as well as romantic partners. And also, we find out about this a lot of this a lot of the adults from this era where now live they have created their own sort of like community in the sewage system because they cannot be with other people because people don't get them. People don't understand why their emotions go from 1 to 100 and then from 100 to 1, right? So that's an example in terms of like we need them, and we know that we need them in many ways because it's part of our life, right? It's part of who we are. Some people may say, oh, well, what about people who have suffer from autism, or who are in the spectrum? They don't know social skills, how to get, how to work. I mean, how to develop bonds with other people. And yes, that's why it may appear for us. But the reality is that when you read the research about, high functioning individuals who have lived with this particular disorder, they tell you that they want that touch, they want that connection with somebody else, right?
Hmm.
What it boils down in terms of like, well, who are the people who don't need them is, I think, people who, for them, they just think that they're not important. But even then, I will still challenge the notion, I think, that people still have, see the importance of having those bonds. The only ones who don't care at all will be, of course, serial killers and antisocial personality individuals who, you know, they do not know what empathy is. They just don't. So I think that, especially in college, right? Like I think that students develop those relationships and they see the importance of those relationships. But I also think that Cal Poly has been one of the areas that I think students are struggling with, both like commuters and I don't know so much about the students who are residents here. But I noticed that we do not do a good job. And when I say we, I mean like I'm speaking about like the psychology department, which is my department, may not do a good job about connecting students. And I think when you connect them, you see how they grow and they become so much more confident. So relationships helps, you know, like from like provide you with that support that you need when you know, when you need it, when something bad happens or something that causes you distress to, you know, like going to a party or going out somewhere, going out to eat or whatever it is. It is more gratifying, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, even studies show that social integration, so like going to events, having peers that you're connected with,
Yeah,
um, is going to make you more likely to persist and succeed and to graduate. And I think,
exactly.
one of the things that I know is just in talking with other people, like I learned so much about myself because
Yes,
my views often get challenged,
yes,
or they're like, I didn't see it that way. And so
yeah,
oftentimes, folks, like other people can be the mirrors for our own growth, to
exactly.
challenge us to evolve, but also to support us when that's what we need.
Yeah,
And I think, in this time, why it's important to talk about relationships is because a lot of people feel really isolated right now, and community is so important, for us to thrive and succeed. I mean, as a community, we're sheltering in place to help others,
exactly.
and to keep everybody safe and healthy. Um,
Yes.
and like, so I do co-instruct a class here on campus, and one of our books we read is The Soul of the Citizen from Loeb. And so when you were talking, I was like, oh yeah, I need to quote this about like the importance of relationships.
Yes.
Um, but it reminded me, this is the quote, that isolation amplifies our impulses toward fear, resignation, and despair, whereas community helps us overcome them. And so I
Yeah.
feel like, that's the importance of these relationships, is helping us to overcome some of these obstacles and the fear that we have, towards, life, because life is throwing things at us, but we can definitely get through it. And it's okay to ask for a helping hand. We're built as humans to be like that. And even what you were saying in the beginning, our parents are our first role models of human
Yeah.
behavior.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that, you know, if you think about it, humans have throughout history, ever since we have a record uh, history about human beings and these men and women, is that we always travel in packs. You know, so that, I mean, that tells us something. The evolutionary, from evolutionary perspective, we are wired to be like that, and that when we don't, then that's when we have physical, psychological, you know, reactions to it, that some people talk about, like they are, you know, they hear voices. I mean, they can really lose their minds. I mean, no, it's a form of torturing people. So that should tell us something, right? So
And I think it's interesting. I mean, like we can see how global and connected we are as a planet faced
yeah,
this pandemic. And so it's like, where is there a place in the world where you're away from society? Really, I don't know that even in Antarctica there are people. So like there's societies everywhere. We're social beings. Um,
exactly.
yeah, so relationships are important. I want to
And they
thank you
matter.
so much. They matter so much. I want to
Yes.
thank you so much for being here and
Thank you.
talking
This
to
was
us,
fun.
your questions. And for everybody who submitted questions and stayed here, we went a little over time, but that's because we're very passionate about this topic.
Because it's important.
And if you're interested in us doing another session like this, please let us know in the comments of
Yes.
YouTube or in the chat, so that we know we can offer this again in the future, because I'm sure there was plenty other questions that y'all wanted answered, or upon watching this, you might have follow-up questions. So let us know if you have interest and we can do another session for you all. So again, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for being here, Dr. Alex.
No,
We
thank you,
love
Maria.
you.
Appreciate
We're
it. We
happy.
love you. I love you all too.
Yes. And thank you so much.
Okay, take care. Have a good evening.